as I have indicated to Musafar, I hope that this will be the beginning discussion of a more intense discussion that may occur in this conference in a year.
Hello, my name is Adam Theta. I work for the Four Handmaids of Jesus Christ in Marshall County as an ecologist. So the last half of your presentation is especially impactful. It's something I've thought a lot about. From your perspective, do you see, as that left the question begging at the very end, what now? Into the future, how shall we then live? There appear to be, maybe this is dualistic tendencies to think this way, kind of two paths forward. This retreat to some sort of smallness again, reorganized, organic farms, small communities, that sort of thing, versus the technocratic kind of, well, we're this far in, we're going to have 10 billion people lay off to eat. We have no choice now to be this ultra technological. We have to go to, wholeheartedly into electric cars, an extensive grid, Internet of Things, etc. Do you see that as, that's just kind of going on my mind, do you see that as the two main paths? Will we see, both of those in play? It's kind of interesting that we are in northern Indiana, in Amish country, and I'm driving in this way, passing, buggies getting pulled by horses. And it seemed to be, a model living within a model, a predominant model in these kind of alternative communities. So there's that question, is that the way forward? And then two is, what does Islam, from your understanding, have anything to say about those particular two paths?
Bismillah. This is something that I need to be realistic, and therefore just acknowledge that I don't have an answer. There is no answer to the situation that has been created over these past decades. The forces of change, if we could just understand what's happening as a first step, and it may take us a while to understand what's happening. They say in Persian, they say the correct diagnosis is half the cure. This is a proverb in Persian. The correct diagnosis of the disease is half the cure. I am at a point personally in my thinking about this, that we haven't even diagnosed the thing yet. If we could just put our hands on what's going on and see it clearly, perhaps solution will come from that point. What's happening now in the world, and I travel a lot and I see the penetration of these same lifestyle and technologies and waste and everything in the deserts of Arabia, in places in Africa where they haven't gone through any steps through which Europe and America have gone through to come to where they are. So there is a strange phenomena happening of technological transformation of societies, breaking the patterns on which they were built, patterns which were there for centuries. And it's not just the so-called environmental disruption, it's also the social breakdown that's happening with it. It's also the breakdown of the homes and individuals that's happening. And the other strange thing I find very strange is the fascination with technology that is just like a disease in parts of the world where these technologies were not born, where they are being imported. So everyone in Asia and Africa, and the highest concentration of cell phones and the higher concentration of all these new things is there. And what these people do not realize, and they are not perhaps able to realize, is that what Heisenberg said, but I really ponder over that quote, that every tool that comes into their home is going to transform the way they live. Now, at the global scale, we also know that all the manufacturing is being done in a certain part of the world from which it is being transported. Yesterday we were stopped at this train crossing Goshen, and this is happening everywhere, and it happens everywhere, these made in China goods. So the dimensions of this waste are so huge that forces which are making this planet into what it is, we need to start to understand how these forces came into existence and how to stop them. The market economy that has evolved over the last 40 years, for instance, the disappearance of the local stores, the coming of the big chains, the cheap products, everything that we can analyze. Of course, one solution is by a large majority of people living in a certain place saying, wait a minute, I'm not going to do this anymore. And in order for that to happen, we need to have communities. The Amish, all of these communities are under attack. They are under attack of this technological advance, just like Africa and Asia and the Middle East is. They are not going to be able to resist. At least their next generation children, they wouldn't be. So my hope is that through informed analysis of the state in which we are, we will gain enough clarity, and the solutions would then emerge in the form of a resistance movement. There is no real parallel in these two examples, but when Gandhi started his non-violence resistance movement in India, he started out by saying that we are not going to buy imported products. We are going to have our own cloth made here locally, wear that simple cotton, eat our own food, and we are going to disobey the British rule non-violently. Initially it seemed like a crazy idea, like what is it going to achieve? But as it gained popularity and thousands upon thousands of people started to practice this non-violent disobedience to the dictates of the colonizers, it gained enormous force by itself. So because numbers do matter eventually to produce a change, the change of heart that perhaps can come through this self-reflection and analysis. We saw that the peace movement when they attacked Iraq, it didn't achieve. Do you remember the days when there was so much hope, when there were 1 million people on the street with us, standing together and saying, no, no, no? There was hope in that, which was crushed when they didn't listen. It was crushed. But there was hope. So the hope comes from having people receive this as an urgent invitation, as an urgent call, upon which depends the future of their lives and their children's life. When things matter personally, they become actionable. So there is that aspect of objective analysis leading to concrete action. Without action, there is no hope. And action by a greater number is better than lesser.
Paul Kine from Goshen College. I wonder if you could just expand a bit more on essentially the connection you see between the first part of your lecture this morning and the second part.
Thank you. Very good.
And it has to do with your understanding of what changed in the Islamic world that we see this current kind of state? Is it related to the fall of those empires, the colonialization that happened? Or yeah, just expand on that a little bit.
Sure. What I presented was just the overall picture of the transformation of these empires into 57 states, often at war with each other. What I didn't say, and this question, thank you for that, gives me the opportunity to explain, that these empires at the political level, we just see the map, but in real functioning, there were established systems of education, of healthcare, of administration, which affect millions of people. When these empires started to break down, they all broke down, all three of them broke down under the influence of the European powers, penetrating either directly or indirectly. In the case of Iran, it was indirect. The systems which had been established over centuries started to break down. The education system, the mosque system, the madrasa system, the hospitals, all of them were running for centuries on the basis of awqaf, the endowment funds, which would be attached to a given mosque, to a given madrasa, to a given hospital. Somebody would donate 5 acres of land, and the revenue from that would be used generation after generation. And in Islam, the legal aspect of endowment is that once somebody says, this is in the name of God, fi sabilillah, in the path of God, I dedicate this property, this money, this trust, this jewelry for this cause, that becomes a perpetual, legally becomes a perpetual trust. Nobody can take it away, nobody can alter it. When the British and the French took over these lands, one of the things they did was cut the economic lifeline of the education system, of the hospital system, and of the madaris, of the religious seminaries, by saying that the ownership has to be in the name of a living person. They didn't recognize the awqaf. They didn't recognize the waqf, the endowments in most cases. Once that was cut off, these institutions became dysfunctional. Education system, until the 19th century, the literacy rate in the Muslim world was far higher than what it is even now, because everything was in the native languages, Arabic or Persian or the local languages. The administration was run using a language that people understood. In the case of the Indian subcontinent, after 1857, when the Queen took over as official ruler of the Indian subcontinent, overnight they switched the administration to English. Now, I was giving Carl the example of somebody, an Arab army coming to America, taking over the country, and keeping the administration as it is, but then after a year or so they say, from tomorrow, everything is going to be in Arabic. Now, all the professors, all the administrators, everything, all of these people would be considered that illiterate. This is what happened to the Muslim population in the French and British colonies. They became illiterate. The scholars, in Urdu there is a proverb saying, "Pade Farsi beche tel." Anyone who is a scholar of Persian is now going to be a grocer, because he cannot do anything anymore. So they changed fundamentally the structure of the societies. And with that came their own institutions. So all these universities were established by the French or the British in those parts of the world where they had colonized. Along with that came their education system. And many of them really believed that they are bringing light to these dark places because their system is better, their education is better, etc., etc. So they disenfranchised millions of people of their heritage. Now, after a couple of generations, languages started to disappear. Even now, only about 20% of Muslims understand the Quranic Arabic. This has happened just in front of our eyes within the last few generations. My grandfather's generation used to be fluent in Persian and in Arabic. But now we have very high education rates, 60%, 70%, with secondary degrees and tertiary degrees, but these people don't understand Arabic. They don't understand Persian, which means they are uprooted and disconnected from their scholarly tradition. Hundreds of years of scholarship is now just nothing for them. This intellectual displacement that has taken place historically over the last century in the Muslim world is one of the greatest factors in destabilization of these societies, because places like Syria and Iraq and the entire Middle East, the Indian subcontinent, places where these institutions were the pillars of the society, from where guidance was coming, from where administration was coming, all of a sudden they have nothing left. So this transformation is so huge in the Muslim world that unless there is a reawakening and retraining to connect to that tradition, and there is the problem is that the Qur'an and the Hadith and the pillars of Islam are still there. Nobody wants to leave their religion, but they have no knowledge of Islam left. Therefore, we see these very small number of extremist groups who are explaining Islam or taking Islam in their own way, and there are no forces left to restrain these extreme shades. And in the West, I live here, but I have my spirit and my heart in the Muslim world. I go there every year, once or twice a year. So I am very intimately, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually connected with that. But when I live here, I see there is no understanding of these historical forces. And all we see is just these 30-second bites of this and that. And that has made Islam opposite of what it literally means. It literally means peace.
Powell, who's got a Powell, David Powell. This is on the same topic.
David Powell. Mostly you've answered the question I had. What happened with languages, however, while you were speaking, made me think of what the United States did with the languages of the native
Aboriginal
population here, and in Canada as well, and with similar effects.
Exactly. Language is the lifeblood of society, of communities. Like without language, we lose everything. We lose the metaphors we need, we lose the communication, we lose history, we lose everything. And that's why literature, this poetry, this Jami's words, like if they were in Persian, this is a Persian poem, and there were Persian people, speaking people listening to that, it's a totally different, and it's a different impact.
Paul, let's let the person in front of you have that.
This is Alex Steiner. I was wondering if, in your description of kind of the state of Islam today, I was wondering if you saw parallels like with like the fall of the Roman Empire, the Greek empires in Europe, where there was kind of just a loss of all the cultural and technological advancements, and like just kind of a period of confusion and kind of like trying to find your way again. Whether you see that's kind of the state of Islam, or if there's, I guess, a different way of understanding it.
Never thought of that. It's a very good question. I have to ponder and reflect on that. What did those people go through when their empires fell? And they lost their languages. I guess there is one unifying aspect of the situation in the Muslim world today, and that is the common thread of faith, which transcends geographical boundaries. And because of that, you walk into a street in Morocco, for instance, and you feel at home, still feel at home despite everything that has taken place. So there is this continuity in the form of daily prayers. The same call to prayer can be heard in Cairo and in Marrakesh or in Istanbul. The same Qur'an is recited in the mosque. So there is this continuity that hasn't disappeared yet, and I don't think it will disappear, because everything is at a different plane from this spiritual continuity that goes back to the Prophet's time in the form of this text that God Himself says in the Qur'an that He has preserved it. And when that verse was revealed, nobody knew how the mechanism would be there to preserve this text. This is a period of 23 years in which the Qur'an is being revealed, and during that period the verse comes that God says in first person plural, we have revealed it to you and we will preserve it. And we saw that during the life of the Prophet it was being memorized, it was being recited in the 5 daily prayers, 3 of which are out loud so that people would listen to it. During the month of Ramadan, the entire Quran was recited in the Prophet's mosque when he died. And from there onward, every single mosque in the world, millions of them, people recite the whole Quran. So it's a perpetual memory of the revelation. And the month of Ramadan, which is called the month of the Quran as well, is people are fasting during the day and they're reciting the Quran at night. So this continuity gives me hope that we wouldn't have the same situation as the Romans and the Greeks did. In some formulation, something new would emerge, whatever political form it takes. So I want to face the realities and not have any falseness in it, but also not despair, because despair leads to inaction. And in the Quran there is a verse which says that only the disbelievers fall into despair, because the believers always have hope in God, because He is all powerful, He can change things.
Yeah, Paul Congan, I just want to follow up a little bit. That you responded in part to the question I had, which overlaps some with Alex's, but probably a little bit further. This Arabic of the Quran really was only native in Hijaz, right, in Saudi Arabia, or what we now think of as Saudi Arabia, in the western part. Every place else that also replaced these languages and traditions with deep scholarly roots and religious traditions. In Egypt, in Syria, in Mesopotamia, Aramaic, Egyptian, Akkadian was suppressed, it was replaced. So that's one thing. So that's one thing that kind of ponder what change did that make, how it shaped the differences one can observe to this day between Morocco and Iraq. But even in those Muslim countries where they still speak Arabic, where Arabic is the language, they can pick up these books and read them. There's a disconnect of some kind. It's as if spiritually they have been, have accepted the fascination with science and technology. And yet, unlike India, which has, in a way, a similar colonial history, India seems to have embraced this, kind of fully engaged now in this world of science and technology. And so, to what would you attribute that contrast?
It's a very fascinating journey of language from the small, tiny city of Medina, which was home to the Prophet and the first community of believers for the last 10 years of his life, to once I calculated the number of miles this state expanded within the first century of Islam. But if you think of Medina geographically and Samarkand and Bukhara in the Central Asian republics now, like this is a huge expanse before the age of motorized movement. What happened was really an intellectual revolution of the first order. With the strength and the force of the revelation, the language of revelation became the lingua franca of a vast number of people whose first language was not Arabic when they embraced Islam. And sometimes this common image of Islam being spread with the sword, the reality is that these the small armies from Medina, when they started out, they took the message of Islam to, for example, Persia. Iran is a fascinating place to study this because they didn't speak Arabic. They had Persian, and they were very proud of their ancient civilization. They are still very proud of their ancient civilization. But Islamization of Persian is a fascinating phenomenon. How they absorbed Arabic terminology and words into their language, kept it in parallel with Arabic, and learned and produced generations of scholars who were equally at home in Arabic and in Persian. Imam Ghazali wrote his Ihya Ulumuddin in Arabic, and then he produced a summary of that in Kimya-e-Saadat in Persian. Many people did that. Jami, whom we quoted this morning, he wrote in Persian when he wrote his poetry, but he wrote in Arabic when he wrote his scholarly works. So the scholarly language transcended the local languages because the scholarship was in Arabic. And that within 2-3 generations became the language of these scholarly discourses that we see. Now, we do have that to some extent path to go back, but the common people now speaking Ami, like the common slang Arabic in Morocco or in Cairo, for instance, they still recite the Qur'an in its original beautiful language, but they don't connect at the deeper level to the beauties of the metaphors and symbolism and the language of the Qur'an in the same way their ancestors did. So there is that hope. Now, the case of India is also very fascinating because India, as you said, has fully embraced the modern way of being, but at the same time it's got a huge amount of numbers of people living there, and that segment of population which constitutes a majority of people living in India are struggling at the level of they are struggling existentially to come to terms with a different mode of living. Indian society is breaking down, just as the Chinese society is breaking down. I have a friend who is Chinese, and he says, every time I go home, I feel strangled because there are buildings in big cities, high-rises, where they have put mesh on the 4th floor or the 3rd floor surrounding the building because people are committing suicide by falling down from these windows. These people, ancient civilization with tremendous spiritual strength, has turned into a machine. People are working 18 to 20 hours a day in these huge factories which are producing goods for the entire world. This is an amazing transformation of that society. We don't get to see what's happening within that society. So India is not too far. So I don't place hope in the Muslim world going the same path as the Chinese and the Indians in order to make more money, in order to raise their capital income. All of those things are secondary to the breakdown. There is something inherent in this system of production and consumption that breaks down families and breaks down communities, especially where labor intensive work is being done, such as China. Like, we never think of how these goods are being produced, and although there are Chinese are a billion people, and yet they are feeding the whole world with these products. What is happening to their own families, to their own children, to their own homes? So my hope is that some way the Muslim world would find some way out of this present situation in a generation or 2 or 3 or 4, where number one, there will be a reconnection with the spiritual and intellectual tradition of Islam at a deeper level. Number two, a recognition that this infatuation with the technology and changing our things every 2 years or every year is not the way to live. This is not sustainable, and there is no good in it to throw out your old things just because they have become old. These are consumerism is something that is an attitude of the mind. There is no one really forcing us, taking us to the store and say, now you throw your fridge out and buy this new one. No one does that. Why do we do that? Just because it has become old? But old is, there is, like, I'm so saddened. That's why I was asking you, when was this building constructed? I'm so saddened to see the real wood going out and these synthetic chemicals coming into our homes. Like, how can you can touch wood? Wood is a living surface. These hardwood floors in our homes, it's living reality. They expand, they contract, but we change it for chemicals.
Yeah, I'm also, this is also a bit of a continuation of the question about the connection of the first. Oh, sorry, Paul Reimer, Department of Physics here at college, at Ocean College. Coming from the Mennonite tradition, and in a larger sense, the Christian tradition of having started out as a group that was oppressed by the surrounding Roman and Greek society, and then being accepted eventually as the religion of the Empire of Rome. One Mennonite critique of that history is that empire has in some sense corrupted the religious movement. Do you see a future for Islam that involves? What's the relationship of Islam as a religion with the empires of the past or the empires of the future? How do you see that? How do you see that relationship?
In the past, the real scholars of Islam, there is a book written by one of the scholars saying that the real scholars should always avoid the rulers. Meaning, do not be co-opted. And it's only by maintaining your independence that you can give sincere advice. So traditionally the role of religious scholars in Islam has been to stay away from the rulers and has been to stay away from the state. And by keeping their independence, they were able to maintain an independent force, which wasn't in the form of an institution. As you know, there is no church in Islam, there is no religious authority per se. But the authority and the strength was in the person of the scholars. There is one and only one case of what we can call Inquisition in Islam that lasted about 33 years, when the Abbasid rulers decided to impose a particular theological view upon the entire population. And one of the creedal aspects of that religious thought was to declare the Qur'an as a created word. It's a very fine theological point. That is the Qur'an, is the text of the Qur'an created in time? Did it come into existence as a creation of God? Or is it eternal speech of God? So this particular Abbasid ruler and one of his successors who came after him decided that this is a created word. The Qur'an is created. And he forced every single scholar to sign on this declaration, the Qur'an is. One of the scholars is a great Imam, Ahmad ibn Hanbal. He was taken, and many people were tortured, and he was taken, and in old age he was given lashes on his back and kept in prison. And he kept saying, no, I'm not going to side with you. Towards the end of his life, they released him. He was living on the second floor of his house. When he came home, he was broken physically, lashed him. This is in his biography. One day, the Caliph sent a delegation to him and said, look, you are now 80-year-old, you are going to die soon. Why do you force me to torture you again? All of these people, just come to the balcony, to the window, the platform of your second floor, and when I say something, you just do this. You don't even speak a word, you just do this. So Imam Ahmad, in his old age, came to the balcony and he saw thousands of people in Baghdad standing underneath his house. And then he was asked this question, and he said, he did. So they lashed him again. And he left behind this beautiful testimony to the independence of these scholars who wouldn't co-opt with the rulers. This is not to say that there were others who did cooperate, but as soon as somebody was co-opted, he lost his authority, he lost his respect. And this is a very fascinating aspect of the civilizational progress in Islam, that apparently there is no office of the Pope or church or anything, but this is the moral authority. And we saw one manifestation of that moral authority in the case of revolution in Iran. When Imam Khomeini went back to Iran, he held no office, he was not head of any political party. It was his moral authority that transformed the society. And I used to go to his house in Qum, where he lived. Whenever I went to Qum, once I was there for 3 weeks teaching a course, and every morning I'll go to his home, which was open to public, and see where he lived. And I heard first-hand reports that gifts used to be given to him, and he had ordered his wife that by the time day comes to its end, nothing should remain in this house. Everything would be given to the poor. So he lived very simply. He slept on one wooden bed with a thin mattress on it. He had one glass, he had a library of books, he ate from one plate day after day. He lived extremely simply. This strength of character, which was typical of these scholars, they lived just like this Mennonite emphasis on frugalness, of making more of nothing. We have a cookbook called More with Less. And this, and this attitude of living responsibly was the hallmark of the strength of these scholars, and that's how they were able to have authority. Not to say that they were not corrupt ones, but this is where the progression took place. So my hope is that religious revival of the same kind would produce a body of contemporary scholars with the same strength, and the masses will listen to them. I hope I have answered some part of your... The political leadership is totally corrupt. Political leadership is totally corrupt in all parts of the Muslim world. And also we see, I was saying something about moral and intellectual bankruptcy of the political leadership that has come forward through this fear-mongering. I see a great connection between post 9/11 world and the rise of certain kind of leaders on the strength of creating enormous fear in their societies. You are just going to die, they are going to kill you, this terrorism is going to happen, let me protect you. And people say, yes, protect us.
I have the microphone. Dan Winsky again. I really appreciate your comments here, and I just want to make a kind of a general question and a general comment. Namely, when, one of the things, I've only been to this meeting twice, but, one of the things that, and back at home we studied science and religion, and one of the interesting things about the dialogue between science and religion is, science is coming up with new ideas all the time, and then, when we present them in a place like this, in science, new findings and observations and so on. And when we talk with people who are theologians and other religious people, the idea is not that we're trying to threaten them by saying, hey, we can prove your religion is wrong or anything like that. We are just trying to say, hey, especially those of us who are religious ourselves, we try to say, here, these new observations or new things, how does this help us understand God better? And how does it understand, God's message to the world? And how does it help us understand, our interpretation of what God's telling us and how we're supposed to live our lives and so on? So we've been talking about this kind of thing here. But, the idea is that science, should not be thought of by people who are fundamentally religious as a threat to them, okay? We're not trying to present them as this is the alternative. The idea is we're all trying to work together, Rabbi Sachs, maybe you've read some of Rabbi Sachs, one of the, he has this interesting idea about the right brain and left brain. And the right brain, of course, is the synthesizing part, and that's the thing is the more religious, whereas the left side of your brain is the more analytic part that wants to take things apart and analyze them. Okay, so my question is, you've been talking here at the end here about revitalizing the spiritual and intellectual side of Islam. Okay, and so the question is, I guess the question is, we don't, like I say, we don't want to think about science as being a threat, okay? And I don't know whether in Islam generally, whether when people come with new ideas about science, whether you feel that, I'm saying you personally, but I'm just saying, that to the religious community, whether they feel that people from the West are trying to threaten them, and they're thinking of it as more of a threat because the religious side is, from the West side is more the Christian side, that this is sort of in a way that we're trying to threaten Islam by bringing up scientific things, okay? But the question is, again, whether they can see through that and see that when people bring up new religious ideas, new scientific ideas, it's really a greater revelation of how God is working in the world. And so I wonder whether they actually, and I want to talk about this on the religious side, not on the political side, which country is being affected and so on, but just on the religious side, whether, people, do the basic ideas of Islam, are they, open to reinterpreting, new phenomena or not? That's the kind of thing.
I think the
Sorry, it's a
Yeah. No,
statement there.
it's a general statement, but as a general response to that general question, there is no threat, no perception of threat to religion from science per se. In fact, discoveries in science most likely and more often than not expand our religious understanding of the text of the Qur'an, for instance, especially whatever is being done in the field of cosmology and neuroscience. These two are cutting-edge fields, and both are producing results which are greatly in harmony with the text of the Qur'an. I think what is dangerous in this whole enterprise of science, that as it has emerged over the last 300 years, is that the scientific community, science happens through a community of scientists, the practitioners of science. Scientific community, and I was a scientist once, I still like science. Scientific community has taken absolutely no responsibility for the results it is producing. There was this brief period after the Second World War, where the atomic bomb was used, of introspection on the part of scientists. Did I participate in the killing of people in Hiroshima and Nagasaki? The response of the system was to do one thing, and that was to partition out the projects of devastating nature into tiny little parcels, and saying, Paul, you have this project, and you have this project, and you have this project. None of these individual units are a danger per se, but collectively they produce weapons of mass destruction. Collectively, they modify the genetic makeup of the food chain. Collectively, they pollute the environment in which we live. Where is the responsibility as far as the scientific community is concerned? Isn't it morally an imperative for our scientific community to form a system of check and balance where the results go? So this is a very complex thing, but I think I want to go back to your first question of this session about the solution. This may be one of the correctives we can do, that the results of my hands as a scientist, I carry a responsibility to what use they are put into by those who make them into whatever they make them into. This has never happened. This should have happened along with the development and the emergence of the scientific enterprise as it emerged. But we don't have any such thing. So to answer your question, no, there is no organized resistance to science. In fact, there is a great infatuation with science and technology in the Muslim world.
This is going to be the last question. Bill, you have the question.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
I really appreciate all that you've shared. I've got several questions in my mind. My name is Bill Wells, and I'm from Andrews University, and I don't study in the field of science, I'd rather study in the realm of theology. But as I've been listening, I've wondered this since really your first presentation. We have the idea of dualism happening within the scientific realm, and that's influenced worldview since Descartes and all the way on, where we're separating out, segregating the idea of life rather than having a holistic view of life, as some authors have called it, a shalom view of life, something that's whole. But I'm curious, I work with, and I'm part of a club of interfaith between Christians, Adventists, and Muslims at my university. And one of the things that I want to engage with, because a lot of students, a lot of my friends are from Saudi Arabia studying there, and how can I help them as they're being introduced into American society to maintain a holistic view for themselves while engaging for the first time in the West, so that they live a holistic life rather than a segregated life and becoming fascinated with the materialism that we see here. Because I want them to be able to engage with a more holistic sense, that they leave then my university not segregated and disenfranchised and returning home to appeal to the materialism that's around them, but that they can return home with that holistic sense. How can I help to teach that and share that and create that space for holism with these new students studying America?
It's a very difficult question, but I quoted Ibn Khaldun yesterday. Ibn Khaldun, who is the father of modern history, in his Muqaddimah, the introduction to history, he says that the conquered nations become psychologically conquered because they realize that this conqueror has conquered them because he was stronger and better. And the conquered nations start to imitate the cultures of the conquering nations. And he gives the example of his time in Spain at that time when he wrote that, or Andalusia was in the Muslim Spain. We saw this in the case of Ottomans. There is a period that is designated as the Tulip Revolution. It was a social cultural revolution which brought a great number of tulips into the drawing rooms of these aristocracy in Istanbul, because they followed what was happening in Europe. So there is a mental colonization. And although the Muslim world has gained political independence after the 1960s, that was the last country to emerge, Algeria, mental colonization is something totally different. And it takes probably several generations to pass through that period of psychological reconstruction of their beings on the basis of their own tradition. Number two, there is great fascination in the work of Satan. We all know that. Satan is he tempts us. He tempts Adam. And in the Quranic description, I always ponder over that. When Satan came to Adam, this is in the verses, he said, "Shall I not tell you of a tree? If you eat of that, you will live forever." But the interesting thing is that Adam was already living forever in paradise. So Satan tricked him, and he took him out of the state in which he was on the promise of that very state. So there is some strange fascination in human beings towards things which appear to be better, greater, etc., etc. And it's only, this prayer of the Prophet, "Oh God, show us the nature of things as they really are." It's a very profound prayer upon which to reflect. And do not show us falsehood as other than what it is. So this phenomena that we see now, this appearance that has been put on to this disastrous development that we see destroying our families, societies, communities, earth, etc., it's very attractive. So anyone who comes from Saudi Arabia has a fascination for this glitter. And it's only through a deeper reflection on this glitter that we can begin to see. I always think of these new products coming on, like the things which were used to be made of stainless steel and metal now have a thin layer upon plastic, which looks just like the real, but they are not real. These doors, I was looking at one of the doors in the bathroom. These doors have a 1/16th of an inch of a veneer. And if you rub your table or desk or something, that's gone and you cannot repair it. The wood, if something happens to it, you just sand it and it's back to its original form. So once this layer, the top 1/16th or 1/64th of an inch is gone, one can see the ugliness under it. And the ugliness in the case of this furniture is just sawdust put together with glue, and it starts to smell bad as soon as the top layer is gone. So I think your assistance can be in taking that layer out, the top layer out, the glitter out. Maybe they will start to see.
Okay, folks, this is presumably the point where I can say the 2018 Goshen Conference has come to an end, even though the adjournment is officially after lunch. I am very tempted to hope that all of those of you who are Mennonites do have a copy of More with Less on your kitchen shelf. That's part of a mark of being a Mennonite. Lunch.
I wish to thank all of you for having me here, for being such a great host. To you, Carl. I feel I'm part of this community.
You are.
I really appreciate your time here. My mother's side has been in Goshen for about 100 years, not so much in the last 20 years. So my ancestors were church history, U.S. history, and then my own grandfather was the minister of this church in the 1930s and 40s, and he was the business manager. Now, because I would only live in a college town in my country. My wife is from the Pacific, so she comes from a very different place than here like you do, and they have been living there for 2,000 years in her country. So after World War II, when the U.S. took over the islands politically from Japan, those people underwent such a vast and rapid transformation. So the chief in her country, he's passed away now, he had a lot of knowledge related to nature and how they interact with it, the navigation, medicine, and many things. But when I went out there as a young man, newly married, we married in this church, I did not know how to climb a coconut tree. And so I said, I'm not really local until I can do that. So one thing that stood out when we brought a woman here that knew a lot about the Jain philosophy in India, and she was showing about the aspects of the material things of like sensate spirit in inanimate objects around us, like you were bringing out. I was at your first talk, and that rang a real bell. So I really appreciate the ancient wisdom, more ancient than we have in our Christian faith, and I appreciate so much.
Thank you.
Everything you've said.
Thank you.
Now you live, is it in Ottawa or Toronto or?
No, close to Edmonton.
Oh, okay.
I hope, just a brief question. Well, I want to make a comment first too. I've seen a lot of India, and I agree completely with what you're saying about India and China. And what I see there is this ecology issue, horrendous. So with Islam as peace, as hope, when you started out, I think it was your first lecture, you said that young people growing up in Islam memorize the Qur'an. So they internalize it. And it's their internal compass, their moral, ethical perspective. Then today you said that many in the Muslim world no longer understand Arabic. So are they losing the Quran that way by not memorizing it? And
it's a Quran is no more the foundational text of their constitution, psychological, spiritual constitution. It's disconnected. It's very,
yes. That's very, very sad. I mean, I can't. In Christendom, nobody does that kind of memorization. Some of it is internalized in other ways.
Right.
But now, if Arabic is not understood, the child, those stages that you went through.
Right. This is disaster. This is really disaster.
The peace is still there in the Islamic world. The peace perspective, the peace. I mean, from my little knowledge of it, but it seems to erode some of that hopefulness.
It does, and although there is also this movement of many young people having not received their traditional education, in their 20s they are turning back to Islam, trying to learn Arabic and trying to go to the sources and trying to reconnect with the scholarship. There is a movement, and one of the sad things is that a lot of Muslims from the West, like the parents who came here, their children are going to Syria to reconnect their children in the 80s and early 90s. A lot of young American Muslims, and especially from UK, they were going to Syria to learn and be there. Like there was a whole movement, and now that place is gone.
And now Syria. Sad. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It has been a transformation.
Thank you.
Yes. God bless.
Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it, and learned a lot, and it was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good trip back. I hope you get back across the border. I think it'd be easier to get out than get in.
Yes.
Well, good luck to you in your travels.
Thank you.